Imagine a corporate giant, a real titan of industry, a company that seemed, well, completely unassailable. And then suddenly it's teetering, right on the brink of collapse. We're talking huge, unprecedented losses, the media just circling, skeptical.
Yeah, a really uncertain future. Everyone wondering, Wall Street, its own employees, can this thing even survive?
Exactly. And this wasn't some hypothetical. This was IBM in the early 1990s. A really dire situation.
It really was.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of information articles, research, books, our own notes, and we really try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, specifically for you, our curious learner.
And today, we're diving into a, frankly, incredible story of corporate transformation. It's Louis Theaker Gerstner Jr.'s own account of leading IBM's turnaround.
Right. The book, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? Just a classic title.
It is. And our mission today really is to unpack Gerstner's journey, almost chapter by chapter. We want to explore his core principles, the specific actions he took, and sometimes they were really counterintuitive, weren't they?
Oh, definitely. Things people weren't expecting.
And we want to see what surprising lessons you can maybe draw from what has to be one of the most challenging corporate turnarounds in, well, history. It's a real masterclass in leadership under fire.
It really is. It shows not just what he did, but maybe more importantly, why it mattered so much, how you turn around a ship that size with that kind of legacy.
Yeah, the why is crucial.
So let's start unpacking this by looking at the man himself, Louis V. Gerstner Jr. You know, when you think of a CEO writing a book about some big triumph, you kind of picture someone really eager to, cement their legacy.
Polishing the statue.
Right. But what always strikes me about Gerstner is he really didn't intend to write a book at all. He says it himself. He wasn't a book writer, didn't have the time, didn't really feel the need to sit and reflect on his, 35 years in business?
Yeah. He was even a bit wary, wasn't he? About telling other people how to manage based just on his experience. Like, who was he to dictate that?
Exactly. So what do you think was the tipping point? What actually got him to, put pen to paper, especially given how private he seemed to be?
That's a great question to start with. And you're right. He wasn't about navel gazing. His motivation turned out to be super practical. Apparently, after he started talking, just speculating about retirement, he was just bombarded with questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But not the usual stuff about the economy or, the future of tech. It was consistently, how did you save IBM? And what was it like when you first got there?
Ah, so people wanted the inside story.
Exactly. And these weren't just casual questions. They were coming from other CEOs, even heads of state. It wasn't just curiosity. It felt like a demand for the playbook. The one that kind of defied all the conventional wisdom about big company decline.
Okay, so that changes things.
Yeah, that's what changed his mind. And it really speaks to his core belief, which was, you just cannot run a successful company from behind a desk, period.
That tracks with his actions, right?
Totally. That's why during his 9 years as CEO, he flew, over 1 million miles, meeting thousands and thousands of customers, partners, employees. He really believed in that direct engagement, face to face.
And he didn't just, dictate the story to someone else. He actually wrote it himself. No co-author, no ghostwriter, which he apparently said was exactly why it would probably be his last book. Just too hard.
Yeah, you can imagine. And he was very clear. These were his views, not necessarily IBM's official line or anything.
What really stands out, though, for me is the dedication. Dedicating the book to the heroes among his IBM colleagues.
Yeah.
He emphasizes it was their book as much as it is mine. That's pretty telling.
It is. He gives credit to so many people for that turnaround. He specifically mentions Denny Welsh and Sam Palmisano. They built what became IBM Global Services. John Thompson, who basically created the software group from scratch.
Abby Constam, too, right?
Yeah.
The marketing head.
Yes. She took what he called a cacophony of confused messages and somehow forged this powerful, unified brand statement. And Nick D'Onofrio, who he called his translator, bridging that gap between the high-tech world and the management world.
Crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there's Jerry York, Rick Tolman, John Joyce, the finance guys who brought discipline to a company that, well, frankly, seemed a bit allergic to it before.
Huh. Yeah.
Larry Ricciardi, his longtime colleague, and Tom Bouchard, the HR head, who, as Gerstner put it, stood tall and took the heat for transforming the culture. But ultimately, he credits thousands of IBMers who answered the call and performed magnificently. It really shows his belief that, it takes a whole team, even if the CEO is setting the direction.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Let's look at the experiences that shaped this guy before he ever got near IBM. He jumped straight into business after Harvard Business School, pretty young, only 23. First stop, McKinsey & Company, June 1965. And his very first assignment, an executive compensation study for Saucony Mobil Oil. He knew absolutely nothing about it, nothing about the industry.
Yeah, but that's the McKinsey way, right? You're just expected to dive in and figure it out, get up to speed super fast, no hand-holding.
So what was the big takeaway for him from that period, that intensity?
Well, he definitely got up to speed, spent 9 years there, made senior partner, ran their finance practice, part of the senior leadership. But the key thing he learned, what he called the most important thing, was that obsessive, really detailed process of deep analysis.
Ah, the McKinsey method.
Exactly. Understanding the marketplace, the competitive position, the strategic direction, just drilling down into the facts. It gave him this incredibly rigorous, data-driven way of solving problems. You can see how that would be vital later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But even with all that intellectual challenge, that fast pace, he apparently felt this kind of growing frustration. He figured out he didn't want to be a consultant forever. He wanted to be like the person sitting in that chair making the calls.
Right. Do it, not just advising, carrying out the actions, owning the results.
Yeah, that desire to be the doer, not just the advisor, that clearly set him up for what came next, didn't it?
It really did. So, 1977, he moves to American Express, takes over the travel-related services group. That's the MX card, traveler's checks, the travel offices. Big job.
And he seemed to thrive there. Describes it as great fun and personal satisfaction.
Yeah, and the results showed it. Under him, earnings for that group grew, compounded at 17% a year for a decade. Cards issued went from like 8 million to nearly 31 million. Huge expansion. Plus, they built new businesses around the corporate card, credit card processing. It was a period of really impressive, sustained growth.
But it wasn't just about growth. He learned some really crucial lessons there, too. Things that definitely shaped his approach later on. He found out kind of the hard way that the open brainstorming, the free-for-all of problem solving, he knew from McKinsey. Didn't really fly in a big hierarchical company like Amex. He talks about his team going into semi-revolt when he tried to reach out directly to lower-level experts.
Wow, semi-revolt. That's strong.
Isn't it? It just perfectly captures that clash. You've got this McKinsey-trained mind, used to meritocracy and data-driving decisions, hitting this wall of ingrained traditional hierarchy. That experience had to stick with him.
Oh, absolutely. You can see the seeds there of how he'd later have to dismantle IBM's own rigid structures. It's like the Crucible, right? Where you learn that the brilliant idea isn't enough. You have to understand the human system, the power dynamics, the communication channels to actually make change happen in a big company.
That insight must have been invaluable when he got to IBM, which was, maybe the ultimate hierarchy.
Totally. And at Amex, he also really got a sense of the strategic power of IT. He saw the Amex card as a gigantic e-business way back in the 70s, managing millions of transactions electronically, huge data centers.
Right, before e-business was even a term.
Exactly. That early exposure to IT at scale, understanding its power, that was incredibly relevant for what was coming down the line at IBM.
Okay, so then his next big move, April 1989. He goes to RJR Nabisco, huge packaged goods company, just gone private after that absolutely wild leveraged buyout, the LBO, by KKR, Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts.
The barbarians at the gate era.
Precisely. He calls this a difficult time for him personally because he loved building businesses, right? Not taking them apart. And suddenly he's managing this extraordinarily complex and overburdened balance sheet. Sounds like a 180 from the growth at Amex.
It was a massive contrast, and the timing was terrible. The LBO bubble burst right after the RJR deal, putting insane pressure on the company. He had to sell off, $11 billion in assets in just 12 months.
Just to service the debt.
Yeah, the interest rates were crazy high, some up to 21% a year. Plus, he inherited what he called profligate spending. Like, he mentions finding 32 professional athletes on the company payroll, part of Team Nabisco.
Wow. Okay, that paints a picture of the kind of financial mess he walked into. But what's really interesting is what he learned from this super tough period, especially since he didn't seem to enjoy it much. He came away with this profound appreciation for free cash flow.
Ah, the holy grail.
Right, as the single most important measure of corporate health. And he also got a much clearer sense of the relationship between management and owners. The importance of managers having skin in the game, putting their own money on the line, through direct ownership, not just, risk-free stock options.
Aligning incentives properly.
Exactly. He left in 92 when it was clear the LBO wasn't going to hit KKR's expected returns, but those lessons about financial discipline, accountability, cash flow, they were burned into him.
And that brings us right up to the edge of the IBM story. Let's dive into part 1, grabbing hold the initiation of change, starting with chapter 1, the courtship.
Okay, set the scene. December 14th, 1992. Gerstner gets home late from some charity dinner, phone rings. It's Jim Burke.
The Johnson & Johnson Tylenol guy lived upstairs, apparently.
Right. Burke admired Gerstner, gets straight to the point, says he's got a much bigger challenge than the rumored return to American Express, which, ironically, Gerstner had already turned down, quite a late-night call.
Must have been. And Gerstner's initial reaction in January was basically the same. Thanks, but no thanks. He felt he wasn't qualified, wasn't interested in running a tech company. He knew services, packaged goods, not, silicon.
But Burke told him to keep an open mind.
Yeah. An IBM search committee, led by Burke, then went on this very public hunt for a CEO. Big names floated. Jack Welch, Larry Bossidy, George Fisher, even Bill Gates, apparently.
And Scott McNeely from Sun just saying IBM should hire someone lousy, brutal.
Yeah, it's this widely watched, almost desperate search. Everyone knew IBM was in trouble.
And the media wasn't helping, just painting this grim, almost end-of-days picture. That book, Computer Wars, calling IBM finished as a force, comparing it to a brontosaurus stuck in the mud.
Paul Carroll's book, The Economist. They all echoed it. The Economist even called IBM's fall a defeat for America. It was heavy. This was the atmosphere, this public narrative of doom that Gerstner was being courted against. How do you even consider jumping into that?
Good question. The turning point, he says, came in February 93. He's walking on a beach in Florida, thinking. And he realizes he needs to think differently. Part of it was his RJR experience, seeing KKR overpay. Maybe IBM wasn't a lost cause. Maybe it was undervalued.
Interesting angle.
And he'd always been drawn to a challenge. So this massive, daunting IBM problem actually started to intrigue him. Jim Burke finally gets him to agree to just take a look.
Okay, so he opens the door a crack.
He meets with Paul Rizzo, who was overseeing finance at IBM. And Rizzo lays out the horrifying numbers. Mainframe revenue collapsing $13 billion in 90, projected under $7 billion for 93. And Rizzo basically says if that doesn't level off, all would be lost.
Wow. That's about as stark as it gets, an existential threat.
Yeah. And after that meeting, Gerstner was convinced the odds of saving IBM were maybe 1 in 5 tops. He decided he should absolutely not take the job. It wasn't in his future. He'd seen at RJR how fast cash runs out, and these numbers were screaming danger.
So he's decided no. But Burke keeps pushing.
Burke keeps pushing, plays to Gerstner's gluttony for world-class challenges, and after this long afternoon meeting, Gerstner finally says yes.
Against his own better judgment, almost.
Kind of. And he notes the irony, right? Burke and the board, they assumed the strategy everyone's talking about breaking up IBM was the right one. They had no idea Gerstner saw it as a strategy of disaster. So he steps in knowing just how precarious things really are.
Okay, so now we're at Chapter 2, the announcement. After some tough contract talks, IBM makes it official. Friday, March 26th.
And Gerstner's life just flips instantly. He describes walking to the podium, dozens of photographers, blinding flashes going off nonstop through the whole press conference. This private guy, wary of the press, is now under this intense global spotlight. He realized this isn't just any big company. IBM was an institution, global. The weight must have been immense.
You can imagine. And his first remarks were, understandably, brief, pretty evasive on specifics because, well, he genuinely had no idea what I would find.
Then the helicopter ride to Armonk HQ. First impressions, like a government office. Long, quiet halls, that blinding orange carpet he mentioned.
And famously, no computer in the CEO's office. Think about that. The head of the world's biggest tech company. No PC. It's almost perfectly symbolic, isn't it? That internal disconnect from their own technology.
It really paints a picture. So he meets the corporate management board, the top 50 or so leaders. All men, all in white shirts, except his blue one. A major departure, he notes.
Then weeks later, they all started wearing colors.
But even though this was supposed to be just a meet the new CEO session, he immediately sets an agenda. No easing in. He challenges the fiction of no layoffs, points out that 120,000 people had already left since 1990, quietly but devastatingly.
Right, calling out the reality. He also expressed skepticism about breaking up the company, said he preferred decentralized, market-driven decisions, but wanted to keep the strength of offering comprehensive solutions.
He called for an end to the self-pity, no more prophets of doom. Focus on solutions, actions, stop blaming. He said he hoped not to bring in outsiders, wanted to trust IBM's talent pool, promised everyone starts with a clean slate.
And his leadership style was clear from day one. Move fast.
Yeah.
Better to be fast than insightful, he said. Little regard for hierarchy, put problem solvers together regardless of rank, cut down on committees, demanded candid communication.
And he admitted, straight up, he didn't fully get the technology, expected his unit leaders to translate into business terms. Basically, I'm not the tech genius here, but I understand business and you need to speak my language.
Yeah, setting the tone immediately.
Okay, now, Chapter 3. First days at IBM.
Yeah.
Very first day. Arrives at an IBM office in Westchester County. Front door's locked.
Seriously.
Yep. Hadn't been issued a badge yet. A cleaning woman had to let the new CEO in.
You can't make this stuff up. That's just, wow, symbolic again.
Gerstner himself calls it a small yet telling incident. A hint of deeper systemic chaos. And it got deeper. At a meeting of country general managers, he sees this double row of AA's administrative assistants.
Okay.
But these weren't just assistants. They were bright, up-and-coming managers, doing mostly admin secretarial stuff, not talking to customers, not developing leadership skills. Apparently doing time as an AA was, required for moving up.
What? So talent was being parked in admin roles.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
just perfectly exemplified IBM's entrenched, process-heavy, inward-looking culture. It wasn't just inefficient. It was a system actively pulling talent away from creating value.
That's unbelievable.
Then he meets Walt Burdick, the longtime head of HR. A powerful force behind the throne, Gerstner calls him. Later, Gerstner sees this 60-page document on being the administrative assistant to W. Burdick.
60 pages on how to be an assistant.
60 pages, full of suffocating rules, mandatory white shirts, keep a supply of dimes, schedule surprise birthday parties under the heading miscellaneous.
Surprise birthday parties listed under miscellaneous in an official rule book. That says everything, doesn't
It
it?
really does. It highlights a culture so bogged down in process and rigid rules that even a birthday party gets institutionalized. What does that tell you about the hidden costs of that kind of internal complexity, especially for a company that's supposed to be innovating?
It's critical. It shows how deeply ingrained that process over purpose mindset was. This wasn't just a company with bad products. It was choking on its own bureaucracy. The focus on admin over customers, the crazy rules, it signals a profound disconnect from market reality. A huge lesson for any big established company.
So in terms of actual strategy early on, he met with his brother, Dick Gerstner, who'd been a rising star at IBM before Lyme disease sidelined him. Got some critical insights about the mainframe's future from him.
And crucially, he hired Jerry York as CFO. Brought him over from Chrysler. Gerstner was impressed by York's frankness, his lack of guile, and just his raw analytical ability. Exactly what IBM needed to tackle its cost nightmare. York had a reputation for being ruthless on costs.
Yeah, the cost killer. Then, just 3 weeks in, he has to chair his first annual shareholders meeting. Tampa. He calls it daunting. Stock had crashed from $43 to $12. Shareholders were furious, out for blood.
I bet.
He also mentions the small symbolic win on that trip, changing the rule that banned alcohol on IBM planes after being told, "Perhaps you could, sir."
Huh. Even in a crisis, sometimes it's those little cultural wins, right? Chipping away at the old ways. Signals bigger change is possible.
Exactly. Okay, this leads us to Chapter 4. Out to the field. Right after that shareholder meeting, he's on a plane to Europe. France, Italy, Germany, UK.
Straight into the fire. IBM, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa was massive. 90,000 employees, 44 countries. But the picture was grim. Mainframe sales plummeting, prices way too high compared to competitors, missing the boat on PCs, brand image fading. The forecast, a negative $800 million cash change. Ouch.
And what he saw internally was just fear, uncertainty, and an extraordinary preoccupation with internal processes. People blaming internal stuff, not looking at the external reality. All the talk was about transfer pricing and alternative divisions of authority, not about customers. Just this inward spiral.
Classic big company disease.
Then comes this pivotal moment, the mainframe crisis and the click herd around the world. He realizes IBM's survival short-term absolutely depends on the mainframe. It's generating over 90% of the profits. But both IBM and the mainframe are, as he puts it, sinking like stones.
Right.
So he's in a meeting with Nick D'Onofrio, who's running the System 390 mainframe business. Gerstner's fiddling with his badge again, can't get it to work right. D'Onofrio's got the overhead projector going, the foils.
Oh, the foils.
Yes.
Yes. The corporate presentation standard back then.
Exactly. And Gerstner, politely, but very pointedly, reaches over and switches off the projector. Just clicks it off, says, let's just talk about your business.
Ooh.
That simple act, that click, Gerstner says it crisscrossed the world via IBM email. Why was turning off a projector such a big deal? What did that really signal?
It was a direct, physical sign that the era of process for its own sake was over. No more hiding behind slides and jargon. It was time for substance, direct talk, focus on the actual business.
And he followed it up immediately with a huge, bold move. A dramatic price reduction on the mainframe. He was convinced IBM was just milking the S390, letting it die. He stopped that strategy cold. Ordered an aggressive price reduction plan to be announced in 2 weeks.
Wow. Betting the farm, basically. Slashing prices on the one product, generating almost all the profit. That took guts. Risking insolvency, really.
But he saw it as essential to save the company's greatest asset. Now, you could argue for a lot of companies, milking a declining asset is the standard playbook, right?
Sure. Harvest the cash while you can.
So what made Gerstner so sure that cutting prices wasn't just speeding up the end, but actually the way to save it?
It went back to that deep analysis, understanding the market and the technology. He also doubled down on a crucial decision made just before he arrived, moving the System 390 mainframe to CMOS technology.
Okay, explain CMOS simply for us.
Right. CMOS, complementary metal oxide semiconductor. It was a huge shift from the older, hotter, bigger, bipolar chip designs. Basically, CMOS let IBM build mainframes that were way more powerful, much smaller, and critically far cheaper to make.
Ah, so the cost structure changed fundamentally.
Exactly. This was an enormously complex project, but it allowed those big price cuts without completely destroying the gross profit margin. Its success was absolutely vital. If CMOS failed, IBM probably would have been out of the mainframe business entirely by '97. Hitachi stuck with bipolar and failed. CMOS ended up generating $19 billion in high-end server revenue through 2001. So the price cut wasn't just a desperate gamble. It was enabled by this fundamental technological shift.
Okay, that makes sense. So after this, he calls his first strategy conference, Chantilly, Virginia. 2 days, 26 top executive. He describes being totally exhausted by it all, just drowning in technical jargon, no real strategic foundation.
Felt like drinking from a fire hose, he said. No one talked about customer segments, rarely compared IBM to competitors, no integrated total IBM view. He was truly confused, felt it was the real low point of my first year. Even doubted if he, this non-tech guy, was the right person for the job. A real moment of self-doubt.
Must have been. But that frustration led to another key moment. At a customer forum. He meets with CIOs, chief information officers, and they are angry at IBM. Mad about letting the mainframe is dead, myth spread, mad about high prices, mad about the bureaucracy.
So he throws out his prepared speech, speaks from the heart, declares that a customer is now running IBM, says IT will transform the world, but he lays out his expectations clearly.
Yeah, redefine IBM, starting with the customer. Give the labs free rein, but deliver open, distributed solutions. Recommit to quality, be easier to work with, reestablish leadership. Not the old dominance, but leadership. Everything starts with listening to customers and delivering performance. A public declaration, really.
New covenant with their clients.
And then, the kicker? He confirms the massive price cuts are coming. Mainframe hardware, software, prices coming down fast. That unit price for mainframe processing just plummeted $63,000 down to under $2,500 over 7 years. Software price performance improved 20% a year. That move, he says, probably more than any other, save IBM, led to a huge turnaround in mainframe capacity demand. He really wasn't afraid to put the company on the line.
No, he wasn't. Which leads us to Chapter 5, Operation Bear Hug, late April '93. Gerstner meets with the corporate management board again, shares what he's seen in his first 3 weeks. Some positives in R&D, product development, but also big problems. Lost customer trust, this mindless rush for decentralization, cross-unit conflicts, marketing versus sales tension, confusing metrics, weird alliances.
So he launches Operation Bear Hug, which, it's a great name, right? Sounds kind of gentle.
Yeah, but the move itself was pretty aggressive.
Totally. forcing these senior leaders out of their internal bubbles into the real world where customers had actual problems. Each of the 50 senior managers, plus their 200-plus direct reports, had to visit at least 5 top customers within 3 months.
Wow, that's a lot of visits.
The goal, listen, show IBM cared and take immediate holding actions, quick fixes. And the reports sent directly to Gerstner, who, he claims, really did read everyone.
That's the key detail. It shows he wasn't just delegating, he was invested. This was a direct assault on that internal Kremlinology he hated, like telling astronauts who've only ever used simulators, okay, get in the real rocket now.
Yeah, no more theory, time to face the customer's reality. He called it the first step in IBM's cultural change, building from the outside in.
And that same day, he basically killed off the management committee, the MC, that super powerful board within a board where every big decision got presented. He said it was unlikely to continue. It formally died months later, but really it died right then in April '93.
He saw it as part of IBM's rigor mortis, right? Diffusing responsibility, this contention system that just led to prearranged consensus. No real decisions happening.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the financial reality was still brutal. He announced dismal Q1 results. Revenue down 7%, gross profit margin dropped 10 points to 39.5%, a $400 million pre-tax loss versus $1 billion profit the year before. Mainframe sales down 43% in the first 4 months, dragging software, maintenance, financing down with it. Only services were growing, but they were small and losing money. Headcount barely budged. The numbers were terrifying.
Absolutely chilling. Okay, now Chapter 6, First Principles. This chapter lays out those foundational strategic decisions he made early on.
Right. First big one, the integrator strategy. Gerstner, having been a customer himself, knew integrating technology from different vendors was a gigantic problem for companies. He believed IBM was uniquely positioned to be the best at this, pulling together pieces from various suppliers into solutions that actually worked.
This was critical, especially when everyone else was shouting, "Break it up!"
Totally. This belief led directly to his most important decision, keeping IBM together. He thought it was just insane to destroy IBM's unique competitive advantage, its scale, its breadth, by splitting it into little component suppliers. CIOs, he argued, didn't want more tiny fish, more minnows in an ocean. They wanted someone to solve their problems, to integrate.
So he basically told the investment bankers planning the IPOs, the accountants drawing up financials for sell-offs, the consultants picking names, thanks, but no thanks, we're done here.
Pretty much. Stopped all the internal activities that were draining energy and money on fragmentation, like having 70 different ad agencies, all these separate HR benefits. He announced, loud and clear, to customers and employees, IBM stays whole.
Which got a mixed response, he says. Some were thrilled, others bitterly disappointed. They saw the breakup as their personal lifeboat out of the sinking ship.
You can understand that fear. The second major decision. Change the economic model. Revenue was slowing from the mainframe decline. Gross profit was sinking because of the necessary price cuts. The only way out. Cut expenses faster than gross profit was falling.
Enter Jerry York, the CFO.
Exactly.
Well,
York identified a massive $7 billion expense problem. IBM was spending 42 cents to make $1 of revenue. Competitors, around 31 cents. It's a huge efficiency gap. You can't survive like that.
So this led to that enormous $8.9 billion expense reduction program, which meant another 35,000 layoffs on top of the 45,000 his predecessor had already cut. He's very stark about it. And matter of survival, not choice. You can really see his RJR cash flow lessons at work here.
Absolutely. He was also just shocked by IBM's own internal IT systems. They spent $4 billion a year on IT, but the systems were ancient, couldn't talk to each other. Hundreds of data centers, 128 different CIOs running their own local stuff.
He called it like railroad systems of the 19th century. Different tracks, different gauges.
Great analogy. Examples were crazy. 266 different general ledger systems. HR systems so rigid you had to be officially fired by one division to get hired by another.
That's nuts. It's not just inefficient, is it? It's like the company actively working against itself. A huge sign of how silos and lack of unified strategy can cripple even a tech giant, despite throwing money at IT.
Precisely. It shows that sometimes the biggest innovation needed isn't a new product for the outside world, but radically re-engineering the inside just to make the company functional enough to compete. A massive lesson for any big organization fighting legacy systems and internal fiefdoms.
So he didn't just tinker. He attacked the whole thing at once. Over 60 major re-engineering projects running simultaneously.
And the results were staggering. Saved $2 billion in IT costs by '95, went from 155 data centers down to 16, 31 internal networks down to just one. Sold off 8,000 acres of land, prime real estate like Atlanta's tallest building, consolidated 21 locations in Westchester down to 5. Overall savings since they started, over $14 billion.
And operationally,
Huge improvements. Hardware development cycles slashed from 4 years to 16 months. On-time product delivery went from a dismal 30% in 95 to 95% by 2001. Just dramatic turnarounds in how the company actually worked.
And the asset sales continue too. Cut the dividend, sold off corporate jets, the NYC headquarters, training centers. The biggest sale was the Federal Systems Company to Laurel for $1.5 billion in early 94. Shedding a low-margin business that just didn't fit IBM's cost structure. Ruthless focus.
He was. Then came that pivotal press conference, July 27th. All the major networks, papers were there. He announces the big expense cuts, the layoffs, and famously he avoids giving some grand vision.
Right. He said the priority was simple. Restore the company to profitability, win the battle in the customer's premises, and get much more aggressive in the client-server arena. Which, for listeners, client-server meant that big shift from centralized mainframes to networks of smaller, connected computers. A huge deal back then.
So even though he resisted the vision label, Gerstner points out that the key strategic decisions were already made. Keep IBM together, reinvest in the mainframe, stay in core semiconductor tech, protect R&D spending, and become relentlessly customer-driven. He had a clear operational vision, even if he didn't wrap it in fancy language.
Okay, let's transition now. Part 2. The road to reinvention, deepening the transformation. Starting with Chapter 7, creating the leadership team and revamping communications. As 1993 wound down, Gerstner's focus shifted to building a new kind of team, finding people ready to work differently.
Yeah, he looked for specific traits.
Yeah.
Clarity of thinking, courage of their convictions, candor, the ability to talk about problems openly, honestly, no more politics.
And he restructured the top, created the Corporate Executive Committee, the CEC, in September. Just 11 members, replacing that old management committee he'd killed off. And the CEC's role was different. It would not take problems delegated up, wouldn't sit through endless presentations, wouldn't make decisions for the business units.
So what did it do?
Its focus was strictly on cross-unit policy issues, strategic stuff that affected everyone. He also created the Worldwide Management Council, the WMC. Bigger group. 35 members, met 4 to 5 times a year. Their job was mostly discussing operating results, initiatives, but primarily getting executives from different parts of IBM to actually work together, like a United Nations of sovereign countries, he called it, trying to break down those silos.
A whole new governance structure, really.
Yeah,
the board of directors got smaller too, right? New members brought in, lots of retirements. IBM's board practices actually got rated among the best later on by CalPERS.
Yeah, significant changes there. And on employee communications, Gerstner saw that as absolutely essential, opening up a clear, continuous line. He spoke directly to employees worldwide, didn't pull punches, acknowledged the crisis head-on.
And recited the grim numbers. $16 billion lost in 3 years. 175,000 employees lost jobs. The dinosaur label. Unhappy customers.
And he basically asked them, don't you agree that something is wrong and that we should try something else? He assured them the painful cuts were necessary, but they'd get through them quickly. No sugarcoating.
That directness must have been jarring after the old IBM culture.
Probably. And he directly challenged that old culture. He includes this blunt employee letter he received critiquing one of his visits. It really highlights those deep-seated issues.
And what did the letter say?
Well, the employee disagreed with Gerstner's McKinsey hierarchy. Customer first, then IBM, then the unit. Argued that oneself should be number one, citing IBM's old principle of respect for the individual.
Wow.
The letter also criticized Gerstner's language, like saying beating the stuffing out of someone saw that as an unhealthy attitude. And it challenged his success metric, just taking IT budget share from competitors. Said IBM should focus on making the pie bigger.
That took some serious guts for an employee to write that to the new CEO.
Yeah.
And for Gerstner to put it in the book, shows a real commitment to transparency, facing the criticism.
It really does. Shows the depth of the cultural mountain he had to climb. Okay, Chapter 8. Remaking the organization. Gerstner declared war on the geographic fiefdoms. These country managers who protected their turf, owned all the resources.
How did he break that?
He reorganized the whole company around global industry teams, got the idea from McKinsey's work with Citibank, broke the customer base into 12 global groups, 11 industries plus one for small and medium businesses. And these industry groups got control of the budgets, the personnel.
Ooh, that must have gone over well with the country managers.
They protested loudly, said it will never work, it would destroy the company. But Gerstner pushed it through, a massive shift of power away from geography towards industry focus.
Then he tackled corporate marketing. Hired Abby Constam from American Express in June '93. Noted that IBM had never had a true head of marketing before. Marketing was just seen as part of sales. Business units basically ignored her at first.
And she found that train wreck of brand positioning, over 70 different ad agencies just in the U.S., a mess.
70, wow.
So she centralized it all. Advertising spend, media buying, moved to global contracts. That decision made huge headlines. The Wall Street Journal called it audacious, the marketing shot heard around the world. Why was centralizing the brand message so critical right then?
It was absolutely vital for speaking with one clear voice to a market that was completely confused about what IBM even stood for anymore. The brand was fractured, weak. Centralizing allowed for a single consistent message about the new IBM.
And that led to the first big campaign, Solutions for a Small Planet, in '94. Those innovative TV ads with international casts signaled a huge shift, right? IBM wasn't just about big iron anymore.
Exactly. It was about global solutions.
Okay, now for a really tough one. Chapter 9, Remaking Compensation. This digs into IBM's paternalistic past. The old system valued equality, sharing, over performance. It was a family-oriented, protective environment, promised jobs for life.
Sounds cozy, but not great for driving performance in a crisis.
Right, and that system was collapsing anyway, amid the financial disaster, leading to cynicism, pain from the layoffs, the benefit cuts. Must have been an incredibly difficult, deeply embedded part of the culture to change.
Oh, massively. So Gerstner brought in his philosophy, pay for performance, his core belief. You can't transform institutions if the incentive programs are not aligned with your new strategy. Simple, but powerful.
So what were the big changes?
4 main things. First, dramatically expanded stock ownership. The Watsons, historically, had limited their own stock and options for executives. Gerstner wanted all IBMers to think and act like long-term shareholders, tying their fate to the market. So stock options went to tens of thousands of IBMers for the first time. Went from about 1,300 mostly top execs in '92 to 72,500 9 years later. And non-execs got twice the shares.
Democratizing ownership, basically.
In a way, yes. Second, performance-based bonuses. Starting in '94, executive bonuses were tied to IBM's overall results, not just their own unit's performance. For the very top execs, bonuses were 100% tied to consolidated IBM results, cascaded down to 60% for the next level.
That's huge. Directly attacks that me-centered culture, forces collaboration. If your bonus depends on the whole company winning, you suddenly care a lot more about helping other divisions succeed, don't you?
Absolutely. It changes the game completely. Third, variable pay for everyone was also tied directly to overall IBM performance, reinforcing that one-for-all team environment.
And the fourth change?
The most controversial one, paring back those paternalistic benefits. Not because the benefits themselves were bad, he stressed, but because the company was fighting for survival and simply couldn't afford them anymore. Even after the cuts, IBM's benefits were still pretty generous compared to others. But the message was crystal clear. The era of entitlement is over. Performance matters now.
That section ends with a kind of poignant postscript. The first year closes, December '93, and Tom Watson Jr. passes away. Gerstner recalls Watson being delighted that he'd decided to keep my company, IBM, together. Gerstner felt exhausted but encouraged, reflected on the massive changes in just 9 months, and noted that Watson himself was always an agent of change. Must have been a very reflective moment for him.
A heavy end to an intense first year. Okay, now we move into part 3, the road to leadership, strategic evolution, and cultural deep dive, starting with chapter 11, back on the beach.
Right. He's reflecting again, about 10 months in now. And he still has these doubts. Can IBM really lead again? He thinks about the dismal track record of other big tech companies pulled back from the brink that usually just became also-rans, never regained true leadership.
He's also seeing the industry shifting under his feet. Value, profit margins moving away from hardware, which was becoming a commodity, towards software and especially services. IBM's old direct sales model was way too expensive for this new world moving to retailers. Coal-free numbers.
And he realizes the real challenge is still ahead. The initial stuff, reorganizing by industry, consolidating marketing, changing pay, that was relatively easy in comparison.
Easy, wow.
Relatively. The truly far more difficult task was devising a strategy for a fundamentally new world and reinventing an encrusted culture from the DNA out. This is where it gets really deep. Moving past the financial triage, tackling the core identity, the soul of the company.
He remembers Jim Burke and that Nobel laureate, Joshua Litterberg, telling him not to screw it up. how IBM was a national treasure. He concludes that just surviving isn't good enough. The die was cast. They had to make the long climb back to industry leadership.
And he notes later they did get back. IBM entered a new golden age of R&D, got more patents than anyone for 9 years straight. Deep Blue beat Kasparov. Shows those changes really did lay the groundwork for a major comeback.
A powerful validation.
Yeah.
Now, Chapter 12. IBM History. A cautionary tale. Here, Gerstner looks back to understand how IBM got into that mess.
He talks about Thomas Watson Sr., powerful, patriarchal leader, instilled those core values. Hard work, fairness, customer service, jobs for life, created that paternalistic culture.
Which was an asset for a long time, but eventually became a huge liability.
Right.
Classic case, right? Becoming a victim of your own success, your own deeply embedded culture. Exactly. Then came the mainframe goldmine, the revolutionary System 360 in 1964. First family of compatible computers, no more rip and replace for customers. IBM became, as Gerstner puts it, a one-product company, the mainframe with all these other businesses just attached to it.
And that led to insane success. Market share soared, 14% compound revenue growth, 60% gross profit margins for 2 decades, from 65 to 85, which inevitably brought the antitrust lawyers knocking.
Right. And this long period of dominance, without really intense competition, meant the culture lost touch with the outside world, got complacent. And what's truly wild is how the antitrust suit itself, which lasted from 1969 to 1982, warped the culture.
This part is incredible. Terms like market, competition, win, they were literally systematically excised from IBM's vocabulary. Banned in internal meetings, apparently. It just completely dampened the competitive spirit.
So the antitrust suit literally made it taboo to talk about competing. Market, competition, win off limits. That's almost Orwellian, isn't it? How do you even start to rebuild a competitive fire in a company that's been actively taught not to compete for over a decade?
It's a huge challenge. It shows how external forces, even legal ones, can have these really damaging unintended consequences on culture. Gerstner realized the enemy wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside. His fight wasn't just against competitors, but against this internal apathy, convincing IBMers it was okay to even have competitors and want to beat them.
Then came the next wave. PCs, UNIX, open systems in the early 80s. IBM's problems got deeper. They totally missed the boat on how important PCs would be for businesses. And crucially, they just surrendered control of the PC's most valuable parts, the operating system to Microsoft, the microprocessor to Intel.
A history-making blunder.
Huge. By the time Gerstner arrived, Microsoft and Intel had ridden that gift from IBM straight to the top of the industry.
So how did IBM pivot from that history? Chapter 13, Making the Big Bets. This outlines the 2 core strategic bets Gerstner made.
Right. Bet number 1 was on the industry direction. He believed customers would increasingly value companies that could provide integrated solutions, pulling together tech from different vendors, and companies that could integrate tech deeply into business processes. This meant the whole IT industry was shifting. It would become services-led, not technology-led.
Okay, that's a big call. What was bet number 2?
Bet 2 was on IBM's own strategy. A networked model of computing was emerging and would eventually replace the PC-centric world, and this new world would be built on open industry standards, which crucially made Microsoft, with its proprietary approach, potentially vulnerable. That was really prescient, seeing the shift from desktops to a connected world so early.
It really was. So let's unpack the services imperative. This was largely driven by Denny Welch, right? Head of IBM's services unit, ISSC.
Yep. Welch had this vision of a services company that would literally take over and manage all of a customer's IT, even if it meant recommending competitors' products, HP, Sun, Microsoft. This idea meshed exactly with Gerstner's integration strategy, a huge departure from the old IBM selling only IBM.
But Welch knew the cultural resistance would be massive, services needing to recommend competitor gear, operating separately from the traditional hardware sales force, having totally different economics, long contracts, maybe losing money up front.
Big hurdles. Gerstner initially kept services under the sales force, trying to force them to depend on each other. Then he consolidated dozens of scattered services groups globally. Finally, in 1996, IBM Global Services was born as its own separate business unit.
And the growth was explosive.
Phenomenal. From $7.4 billion in 92 to $30 billion by 2001. Became roughly half of IBM's entire workforce. But the bet itself was huge. Services are way more difficult to manage than products. It meant betting IBM's balance sheet. They often bought the customer's existing IT assets, betting on economies of scale, consolidating data centers, and betting on massive recruitment, hiring over 1,000 people a month at times.
Wow.
Services ended up generating something like 80% of IBM's revenue growth after 1993, and Sam Palmisano, who later succeeded Gerstner, played a huge role leading that services unit.
Okay, then the software bet, specifically focusing on middleware. This was tough too because IBM lacked a real software mentality. Most of its software was tied to the mainframe, and they were burning cash on OS/2, fighting that religious war against Microsoft Windows.
Yeah, after gifting Microsoft the PCOS market, they were losing the next battle too.
Yeah.
So Gerstner tasked John Thompson, who was running the server group, to build a real software business basically from scratch. Late 1994.
And Thompson walked into a mess. 4,000 different software products, over 30 labs, no coherent management system.
So Thompson got to work. Recruited or trained 10,000 dedicated software salespeople. Cut the number of labs from over 30 down to 8. Consolidated 60 software brands down to just 6 key ones. Refocused R&D.
And they zeroed in on middleware. Why middleware?
They realized that in this coming networked world, middleware, the stuff like databases, transaction systems, systems management tools, that was going to be the key strategic battleground. It's the software glue that connects different applications and systems, lets them talk to each other. Think of it like the nervous system for a company's software infrastructure. In a networked world, it became absolutely critical. IBM doubled down.
So they made a huge, multi-year, very expensive bet on rewriting their key software, not just for networks, but to run on competitors' platforms too. Sun, HP, Microsoft.
Exactly. Caused massive internal tension, people screaming, "We're collaborating with the enemy." But it was strategically vital.
Then came the Lotus acquisition in '95. Hostile takeover, $3.2 billion. Done in a week.
Big move. Lotus was culturally very internet-focused, and they exploded Lotus Notes installations from 2 million seats to 90 million by 2001. That acquisition really signaled IBM was back out of pure survival mode. They also bought Tivoli Systems, another middleware player, for $50 million, grew that to over $1 billion.
The results.
By 2001, IBM Software Group was one of the most powerful software companies on the planet, second only to Microsoft. $13 billion in revenue, leaders in software for network computing. A massive shift in where IBM derives its value.
Okay, let's move to Chapter 16, opening the company's store. This sounds intriguing. Divesting and partnering.
Yeah, this was about Gerstner pushing another controversial idea. Selling IBM's own cutting-edge technology components, chips, storage, etc. to its competitors. Dell, HP, Sun, selling into the merchant market, or OEM business.
That must have been as tough a cultural pill to swallow as letting services support non-IBM gear.
Probably tougher for some old-timers. But it recognized the reality of the industry ecosystem, and the chip industry itself was shifting, value moving to big back-end processors and custom chips for the billions of new access devices coming online. IBM's technology group actually became #1 in custom microelectronics. They had that PowerPC chip renaissance, big deals with Sony, Nintendo potentially worth more than the whole PC industry volume back then.
This was part of unstacking IBM, right? Historically, IBM built everything, every layer of the technology stack.
Yep. But by the 90s, smaller companies made pieces of the stack. New stacks like Unix or Intel Microsoft emerged. IBM's share collapsed. Gerstner realized IBM just could not be everything to everybody. Needed to focus.
So strategic withdrawals. They got out of that OS/2 versus Windows slugfest, focused software efforts on middleware instead. They withdrew from application software, things like accounting packages, which was mostly unprofitable anyway, and just alienated potential partners like SAP.
Right. Instead of competing with application vendors, IBM started partnering deeply with them. Structured, detailed commitments. Signed up 180 partners like Siebel Systems. That brought in billions in extra revenue, selling the hardware and services around the partner software. Smart move.
Then the huge sale of the IBM Global Network to AT&T for $5 billion in '94. IBM had built its own massive data network, but Gerstner saw the big telcos pouring vast sums into global networks. IBM couldn't compete with that capital investment. Its network would become a huge drain.
So they got out while the getting was good, sold it for a good price, exited a business whose value was about to plummet. Another example of choosing focus over breadth, even if it meant letting go of something that felt core but was actually becoming a liability.
But one area they didn't exit, despite the pain, was PCs. The PC dilemma, he calls it. The most difficult business to overhaul. Unprofitable for 15 years straight, mostly because Intel and Microsoft owned the key pieces. IBM had blown the strategy early on, struggled with distribution, manufacturing.
So why stay in?
Despite the losses, it was still huge revenue, and Gerstner felt it gave them critical customer mindshare. He didn't think IBM could be a true integrator if it didn't have a presence in PCs, the main device on most desks. But even writing the book, he questions if it was the right call, admits it was painful and costly. That honesty is interesting. Even he wasn't sure about every decision in hindsight.
It shows the complexity. So IBM shifted its focus. The new stack wasn't about owning every layer of tech. It was about understanding the customer's business processes and applying the best technology IBMs or partners to improve those processes. This opening up the stack freed up resources for new growth areas. Storage, self-directing computers, bioinformatics, nanotechnology. All about focus.
Letting go of old battles to fund future ones. Okay, let's look at Chapter 18, the emergence of e-business.
Right. Gerstner had seen convergence coming for a long time. Telecom, computing, consumer electronics all blurring together. His second piece of luck, he says, also involved Denny Welch. Back in '92, Welch landed IBM's biggest contract ever, outsourcing all Lassier's data operations. That deal led to a joint venture called Advantis, which became the IBM Global Network, which was, for a time, the world's biggest internet service provider.
Even though they later sold that network, as we heard.
Exactly. But running it gave IBM this crucial early understanding of the shift towards the cloud, this massive global connectivity that was about to revolutionize everything.
So Denny Welch's task force recommended IBM commit everything, all its resources, to lead this new networked wave.
Yeah. And IBM's earlier bets on open, standards-based computing made that pivot easier. Middleware, like their WebSphere product, was critical for building these new network-enabled applications. Irving Ladowski-Berger headed up a new Internet division to basically evangelize this strategy across the entire company. They went all in on the Internet, but in a very different way than the dot-coms.
Right. They really started shaping the conversation. Gerstner first talked publicly about a network-centric world way back in March '94, but nobody really noticed. By fall '95, though, it was the absolute centerpiece of IBM's strategy.
But then the dot-com boom hit peak craziness.
Yeah.
IBM made a key decision. They would not compete directly with their customers by launching their own online content or retail sites.
Right.
They needed a different way to talk about the Internet's impact, something beyond just websites. They needed to convey how the net would reshape every important kind of relationship and interaction.
And that's where the term e-business came from. Gerstner says he wasn't initially impressed by the term itself, but he saw its power. It had business, not technology, as its core idea. And critically, IBM decided not to trademark e-business. They wanted to own the concept, be the architects and agenda setters for this new era, not just hoard a buzzword. Brilliant positioning.
It really was. Enabled them to become the trusted partner for established companies trying to navigate this new world. And IBM famously kept its distance from the dot-com hysteria, the new economy craziness that valued page views over actual profits.
Gerstner called the dot-coms fireflies before the storm. He saw the real revolution not in the startups, but in existing institutions transforming themselves using the internet.
He ends this section with a powerful reflection. Adapting products, embracing open standards, that was hard. But changing the culture, the deep-seated mindset and instincts of hundreds of thousands of people who'd grown immune to competition, that was far bigger and harder, his metaphor. Like taking a lion raised for all of its life in captivity and suddenly teaching it to survive in the jungle.
Wow. That really sets the stage perfectly for the next part, doesn't it? Chapter 20. Changing the culture. The deepest dive. He basically says here, culture isn't just one aspect of the game.
It is the game. His words. He states flat out, an organization is simply the collective capacity of its people to create value. Vision, strategy, they matter, but success over the long haul depends on the culture being baked into the DNA.
He traces IBM's culture back to Watson Sr. That paternalism, jobs for life, rigid rules like the dress code. It worked for a long time, codified how we do things. But when the world changed, that very success became an enormous impediment.
And he talks about the corruption of basic beliefs. Those wonderfully sound principles Watson laid out had just morphed into empty homilies, like superior customer service. It just became servicing our machines, not understanding the customer's changing business, not challenging them, just largely administrative, like going through the motions in a marriage that has long since lost its passion.
Ouch. That's harsh, but probably true. And respect for the individual, maybe the most sacred IBM belief. It devolved into a culture of entitlement. Employees expecting rich benefits and lifetime employment without really earning that respect. It also meant, he says, IBMers felt they could do pretty much anything, with little or no accountability. Firing someone was seen as disrespectful. It sounds like a corporate family that lost its way, expecting all the privileges without the responsibilities.
An astute way to put it. And changing that, it's profoundly difficult. Gerstner says business schools don't teach you how. You can't just mandate it from HQ. You can't engineer it. Management has to somehow invite the workforce itself to change the culture.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive, as he calls it.
Totally. He says he committed thousands of hours of personal activity to it, being relentlessly upfront and outspoken with his leadership team. He knew it would take at least 5 years, and even then, he admits he underestimated how long and hard it would be.
He then lists these manifestations of dysfunction, all stemming from this intense internal obsession. First, the customer always came second. He was shocked by how little customer or competitive info people had. IBM just defined the market in its own image. All the energy went to criminology, internal politics, tracking who was in and out. Every presentation started with an org chart showing where the speaker sat relative to the CEO. That obsession with internal hierarchy over the external reality sounds like a guaranteed path to failure.
It really does. Then there was this pervasive culture of no. That respect for the individual principle had twisted into this pervasive institutional support system for non-CAC action.
The infamous non-concur system.
Exactly. Any IBMer could basically veto a colleague's proposal or decision just by non-concurring. Blocked everything, caused unconscionable delay, duplicate effort, bitter personal contention. As Gerstner put it, no one would say yes, but everyone could say no. Even silent non-concurs were a thing.
Unbelievable. And the interdivisional rivalries. Hardware making deals with Oracle, software's biggest enemy, without even telling IBM's own software unit. Divisions bidding against each other for the same customer. Utter chaos.
He was actively working against each other. Bureaucracy was out of control. Tens of thousands trying to protect prerogatives. Thousands more trying to bestow order. And the language, this insular acronym-stuffed IBM lingo.
Oh, yeah. Crisp up, tweak, swizzle, boil the ocean, down level, level set, take it offline, hard stop.
One performer, management-initiated separation, or MEISed, left the business, measured mile. Gerstner said he constantly had to ask for a plain English translation. It's such a classic sign of an organization that's become totally sealed off, just talking to itself.
Absolutely. And finally, the issue of presiding versus acting. Senior execs just presided over work, reviewed it after it was done, didn't dig in, didn't personally own the results. Gerstner expected them to get their hands dirty, participate directly, shock people who weren't trained that way. And those corporate officer titles, they were for life, didn't matter how you performed.
A recipe for stagnation.
So how did he fight back? Chapter 21, Principles and People, Defining the New IBM. September 93, he writes down 8 principles for the new IBM. To define priorities, attack that management by process.
Let's hear them.
Okay. 1. Market-driven. Agenda comes from the customer back. 2. Technology company. Commit to quality, funnel knowledge into products customers need. 3. Success measures. Customer satisfaction and shareholder value. 4. Aggressive. Win in the marketplace. 5. Strategic vision. Clear sense of direction. 6. Urgency. Constructive impatience. Better fast than insightful. 7. Teamwork. Great people working together rewarded for it. 8. Sensitivity to employees and communities.
Pretty clear shift in focus there. Then, spring 94, he holds this big meeting. 420 leaders. He has one goal: get their focus outside the company.
How do you do it?
Show them charts. Plummeting market share, lost over half since 85. Terrible customer satisfaction, 11th in the industry. Then he tried to ignite some competitive anger, urge them to start kicking some butts, namely of our competitors.
He showed photos and quotes from rivals, right? Like Larry Ellison calling IBM irrelevant.
Yep. Expressed his own anger that IBMers seemed passionate only about fighting other parts of IBM, not about competitors. Said they're coming into our house and taking our children's college money. It wasn't just a pep talk. It was this raw, emotional plea to wake up that competitive spirit that had died.
He slammed the recurring failure to execute, the endless tolerance of it, the pushback culture, people fighting decisions that were made years ago. Declared IBM would be performance-based. Said he'd personally get involved in filling key jobs with people who make things happen.
And he laid out those desired behavior shifts, that to-from chart.
Right. From product out to customer in, from do it my way to do it the customer's way, from manage to morale to manage to success, from decisions based on anecdotes and myths to decisions based on facts and data.
From relationship-driven to performance-driven and measured, from conformity to diversity of ideas and opinions, from attack the people to attack the process, and maybe the killer, from looking good is equal to or more important than doing good to accountability. That's a total cultural blueprint, isn't it?
Absolutely. A complete reset. He created the senior leadership group, SLG, capped it at 300 people, no tenure, an annual triage where you needed team support to stay in, high turnover, clear message, embrace the new culture or you're out.
He promoted people who got it, who embraced change, established those IBM leadership competencies, team leadership, straight talk, passion for the business. Then, when the transformation seemed to stall a bit, he introduced that simple mantra: win, execute, team.
Break that down again.
Win. Business is competitive. The enemy is outside, not inside IBM. Marketplace drives everything. Execute. Speed, discipline. No obsessive perfectionism. Get stuff done fast and effectively. Team. Act as one IBM. Collaborate.
And this became part of the performance management system, personal business commitments for everyone.
Yep. Tied directly to how people were evaluated and rewarded. Then, as the immediate crisis faded, he needed a new rallying cry, something to galvanize the whole company. E-business became that moonshot.
Infused into everything advertising, R&D.
Right. Gave IBM a clear marketplace-based mission and also a new framework for behaviors and operating practices, in other words, culture. He describes the new breed of IBM emerging, big but fast, entrepreneurial and disciplined, scientific and market-driven, abhors bureaucracy, rewards results, above all, covets talent and passion. Sounds like they really did manage to reinvent their internal identity.
An incredible transformation. Okay, let's shift gears slightly to part 4. Lessons learned, Gerstner's leadership philosophy, starting with chapter 23. Focus. You have to know and love your business.
His core argument here: lack of focus is the most common cause of corporate mediocrity. Strong statement.
He talks about the grass is greener fallacy, how companies often stray from their core competencies when the main business struggles. Gives examples: Xerox trying financial services, Coke making movies, Kodak buying pharma companies, Amex trying cable TV, Nabisco getting into tobacco.
Yeah, with diversification disasters.
He says it's very, very hard for a buggy whip company to become an airplane manufacturer. Great companies, he argues, don't just jump into totally new pools. They constantly self-renew their core business. That feels like such a critical lesson for leaders facing disruption today, right? Dig in, transform your core, don't just chase the next shiny thing hoping it'll save you.
Absolutely. He also warns against acquisition fever, how CEOs often go for glamorous acquisitions instead of fixing the underlying business. Gerstner actually credits a good portion of our success at IBM to the deals they didn't do.
Like which ones?
MCI, Nortel, Compaq, SGI, Novell. Deals often pushed hard by investment bankers with crazy projections. Resisting that pressure to just buy growth was key.
He also distinguishes between vision and strategy. Says vision is easy, but good strategies are long on detail and short on vision. They need deep understanding of customers, competitors, economics, translated into precise action programs, multi-year plans, hard numbers, resource allocation. IBM even set up independent customer satisfaction tracking in 55 countries, feeding that data into plans almost constantly. That sounds incredibly rigorous.
It does. He stresses hard-nosed competitive analysis because intelligence wins wars. Companies need unbiased, continuous competitive insight. Tear down competitor products. Scrutinize their financials. Don't rely on your own managers to tell you how bad things are. They won't.
And allocating resources, that's the hardest thing, he says. Companies often disconnect strategy from operations, fail to shift money and people to the real priorities. IBM had to fight to keep funding projects vital for the long term, but offered little short-term payoff.
Finally, on focus, he talks about survival of the fattest. Argues that in many companies, it's not the fittest divisions that get resources, but the fattest, the currently successful ones, just reinvesting in their existing products. IBM had to implement a rigorous portfolio review, use zero-sum planning to actively starve the losers and fund the new big bets, meant killing thousands of research projects, phasing out products, selling whole businesses. That's where the rubber meets the road, making those tough choices.
Really forcing priorities. Okay, next lesson. Chapter 24. Execution strategy goes only so far.
Right. Gerstner argues that execution, actually getting things done, making it happen, is the most unappreciated skill of a great leader. Strategies themselves are rarely unique. Everyone knows basically what needs to be done. Success comes from doing it faster, better, more often, and more productively than your competitors.
And a key part of that is people respect what you inspect. He calls it a dirty little secret of consulting. CEOs often just state expectations but don't follow up. They confuse expectations with inspection. Brilliant strategy decks, passionate speeches mean nothing if the leader doesn't actively check on implementation. This is so vital for any manager, isn't it? To actually follow through, see if what you asked for is happening.
It's absolutely crucial. Execution, he says, means translating strategy into action with measurable targets, clear accountability. It usually forces the organization to do something different, value something more, move faster. He points out that IBM, even with clear needs and him pushing, initially just stood still in the water because the execution muscle was weak.
He also highlights world-class processes. Great companies build processes aligned with what actually drives success in their industry. Walmart's inventory, GE's cost management, Toyota's product lifecycle. Old, broken processes just lead to failure.
Strategic clarity is another must-have. Employees need to clearly understand their role, the company's direction. Like the Home Depot sales team, knowing exactly what they need to do. Conflicting signals, CEO wants quality, CFO demands cost cuts, just leads to confusion and paralysis.
And finally, he talks about creating a high-performance culture. These cultures are just winners. Executives lead, employees are committed, products are top-notch, quality is everything, losing makes people angry, mediocrity isn't tolerated.
Which leads perfectly into chapter 25. Leadership is personal. He says this for near the end, calling leadership the most important element of institutional transformation. Great institutions aren't just managed or administered, he says, they are led by individuals who create those high-performance cultures, set tough goals, measure results, hold people accountable, and constantly drive change.
And personal leadership means visibility and action. Great CEOs roll up their sleeves and tackle problems personally. They're out there, daily customers, suppliers, partners, leading by example. They have to be strategic and operational, really understand the financial nuts and bolts. It's also about communication. Leaders talk often and honestly, respecting their audience. No hiding behind corporate doublespeak, no delegating the bad news. Sounds like the complete opposite of the old IBM way.
Totally. But maybe most of all, personal leadership is about passion. He sees this as the common thread among great CEOs he knew. Sam Walton, Jack Welch, Jürgen Schrempf, Andy Grove. They want to win. Every day, every hour. They hate losing, demand corrections. Leadership isn't some cold, distant intellectual exercise. It's personal.
He tells that story about an interviewer asking if he was passionate about, tiny market share shifts for toothpaste. And internally, he thought, no, of course not. But later, he realized he was wrong. That passion, even for the small details, is the electricity that makes a well-run company run harder and better.
So he argues managers need to develop that emotional side. People want to follow winners. Passion for the business became one of those IBM leadership competencies. He says a big reason he recommended Sam Palmisano to succeed him was Palmisano's deep passion for IBM, his emotional 24-hour-a-day attachment to winning.
He closes this chapter talking about integrity. Great leaders are tough, yes, but they have to be fair. Applying rules inconsistently just destroys morale and respect. He says he faced hundreds of conversations with executives wanting exceptions, special treatment. He stresses leaders who allow exceptions lose all effectiveness. And he added a postscript in 2002 condemning the corporate scandals of the time, emphasizing absolute personal integrity, strict codes of conduct.
Very timely then.
Yeah.
And now, last big lesson chapter 26. Elephants can dance.
No.
The integration dilemma. Here, Gerstner tackles that classic debate, centralization versus decentralization.
Yeah, he challenges the common wisdom that decentralization is always good, centralization always bad. He acknowledges McKinsey helped popularize decentralization for good reasons, faster decisions, closer to the customer. But he thinks it was carried to an extreme in the 80s and 90s, led to duplication, higher costs, actually made companies slower.
So big companies, he argues, can't be totally decentralized. They have to find the right balance between common shared activities and highly localized unique ones. He breaks down common activities into 3 categories or levels.
Okay, what are they?
Category 1 is the no-brainer stuff. Back office functions, data centers, HR processing, accounting, real estate procurement. Huge economies of scale make integration the obvious choice here.
Makes sense. Category 2.
Category 2 is marketplace-linked business processes, more like the front office. Things like customer databases, order fulfillment, CRM systems. Integrating these can yield powerful benefits, but it takes really good execution to overcome the parochial interests of different divisions who want their own systems.
Right. Harder, but potentially valuable. What's category 3?
Category 3 is shared approach to winning a new marketplace. This, he says, is a step too far for most companies. It's the most difficult, most controversial level of integration. It requires profit center managers to actually subjugate their own objectives for the greater good of the company's strategy.
He gives that example from American Express, right? When the brokerage unit got access to card member lists for cold calls, it caused an open revolt in the card division, violated their core principle of trust and privacy.
Exactly. So Gerstner warned CEOs, do not go to this third level of integration unless it is absolutely necessary. Most companies can get the integration benefits they need just by focusing on categories 1 and 2.
But if it is necessary, like it was at IBM, to present that unified face to the customer,
then it requires the CEO's absolute personal commitment. Cannot be delegated. It means forcefully shifting power, taking it away from the existing barons, the geographic or product bosses, and bestowing it publicly on the new barons, the customer-focused teams. That means changing who controls budgets, bonuses, pricing, investments. It's basically declaring war on the old power structure.
Wow. Sounds intense.
It is. And you have to change the measurements and rewards to reinforce it. Measure and reward the future, not the past. At IBM, remember, those top executives' bonuses became entirely based on IBM's total results, not their own units. Gerstner flat out advises CEOs, don't even attempt this kind of major reintegration if you're not willing to manage compensation this way. It won't work.
He calls implementing Category 3 integration a tremendous battle, a lonely battle for the CEO, because the existing teams will fight tooth and nail against losing their autonomy, which, he argues, is exactly why we still don't see true financial supermarkets or truly integrated multi-service telecommunications companies, despite decades of talk about them. That Category 3 integration is just too hard for most to pull off.
A fascinating insight into why those grand corporate synergy visions often fail.
Okay, finally, we reach Chapter 27, IBM A Farewell, his departure.
And he says this felt different from leaving his previous jobs. Before, he was always looking forward to the next challenge. Leaving IBM, he found himself looking back, realized he had actually fallen in love with IBM, calls the experience fascinating, important, frustrating, exhausting, and fulfilling, all at once.
But he also reflects on always being, even to the end, an outsider. His senior colleagues who'd spent their whole careers at IBM, Palmisano, Thompson, D'Onofrio, they had a richer experience, personal linkages he could never fully replicate.
That's an interesting admission. He notes that his successor, Sam Palmisano, had the chance to connect with IBM's past in a way he couldn't. But Palmisano's challenge would be to do that without going backward, to recognize that those centrifugal forces that made IBM so inward-looking were still lie powerful in the company. The ultimate CEO job, Gerstner concludes, is to continue to drive change while building on the best and only the best of the past.
A tough balancing act. We also have an appendix here looking at the future of e-business, written around 2002. What were his thoughts then?
He was still bullish on the Internet's power, pointed to the rapid growth, 90 million users in under 5 years, 500 million by 2002, predicted $4 trillion in e-commerce by 2005, called the net the single most important driver of change for business, healthcare, government, society for at least another decade.
And he reiterated IBM's different view. While the dot-coms obsessed over consumer browsing, online shopping, IBM saw the net's deeper potential, transforming every kind of enterprise by digitizing physical processes, compared it to electricity replacing mules in factories, a fundamental shift.
He also acknowledged the real digital divide, half the world without phones, less than 10% online back then. But he expressed hope that telecom competition, IT innovation, good leadership could shrink this gulf. Lower telecom rates, cheap access devices, cell phones, PDAs, game consoles, kiosks could bridge it. He clearly foresaw billions of mobile devices connecting to the net.
He talked about ubiquitous computing too. Products reporting their location, manufacturers getting instant usage data, devices phoning home for repairs, cars, pacemakers, even intelligent kitchen counters warning about drug interactions, making tech more pervasive and more invisible.
And as tech gets more complex, hiding that complexity becomes vital. IBM's techies were proposing autonomic computing, self-managing systems as the next big challenge. Systems that could basically run themselves, self-heal, self-optimize, without constant human babysitting.
He also looked beyond just computers talking to each other, towards grid computing, where networks of computers could actually work with one another, pool their power, storage, solve huge problems together, like bioinformatics analyzing the human genome needing 10 billion pages of analysis. He thought this could lead to maybe 20-year extensions of healthy human life. Big ideas.
Huge. But he also saw the societal issues coming. Privacy concerns, location tracking, who gets access to medical data, the potential for a genetic divide if only the rich could afford advanced health care. And post 9/11, information warfare was suddenly a major concern. He called for a new kind of leader, comfortable with constant change, global thinking, balancing culture and cooperation, embracing openness and integration.
His final thought in the book is really powerful, though. Technologies are amazing, magnificent creations, but they aren't mystical solutions to deep human problems. Bias, poverty, fear. Those problems need intensely human solutions. People using their free will, reason, applying these powerful tools for the greatest good.
A grounding perspective.
So, today we've really journeyed through Who Says Elephants Can't Dance. We've uncovered how Lou Gerstner navigated IBM through that near-death experience, transforming not just the business model, but really the soul of the company.
Yeah, we saw the raw honesty of his personal journey, those huge strategic pivots that kept the company from breaking apart, and that relentless, almost obsessive focus on culture and execution. That's what truly allowed that elephant to dance again.
So thinking about all this, what stands out most to you, our listener, from Gerstner's account? Maybe it's the profound impact culture has, for good or bad, or the critical importance of inspecting what you expect as a leader, or maybe just the sheer audacity of reinventing a company around customers and services like that. How could these principles apply to challenges you face in your career, your team, even just how you approach solving problems?
And here's a final thought to chew on. Gerstner concludes IBM's biggest problems were internal. That hermetically sealed culture, the obsession with process over reality, leadership that just presided instead of acting. It raises a big question for any large organization, even smaller ones trying to grow. Is the biggest threat really out there in the market, or does it actually lie within? In those unexamined assumptions, those comfortable habits that quietly strangle transformation from the inside out.
Something to think about. Join us next time on The Deep Dive for another exploration into the heart of what makes things tick.